I have a few idiosyncrasies, some of them good, some of them bad, but they show who I really am. I may be the only person in history to have been dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army Rangers and disparaged by the Virginia State Bar before my 30th birthday, both times for physical assault. That's all I'll say on the subject, except that I've only spent a few days in jail or in the brig. Obviously, I have what many consider a bad attitude. In my opinion, my attitude is take no S and never back down, and I have no intention of changing. I was born with a near-perfect physique, combining strength and endurance. My reflexes and reaction speed have been tested in every way possible, and I'm in the top 100 percentile of the best in the world. I am not very large, 6 feet 1 inch, 205 pounds, but given my inherent strength, stamina, reflexes, and reaction speed, I have never lost a fight, even against multiple opponents. I also have an aptitude for languages. I didn't develop it specifically, but I was born with the talent and have cultivated it. My name is Gregg Castle, and I tell you this to explain how and why this story unfolded the way it did. After my license was revoked, I began looking for a new profession, although I was still hopeful that the attorney I hired could reverse the decision. An old client of mine, knowing my background and capabilities, recommended me for a position as a translator and bodyguard for a film crew working on a documentary in an Eastern European country, which I will call Emperor, where the M4 language is spoken. I'm using fictitious names so as not to reveal the real name of the country, which might antagonize some people, especially if they believe what I tell in the story. I speak Emporian almost fluently and without an American accent. When I met the predominantly American movie crew, I was not surprised. They seemed naive, and the narrator, reporter, and project manager seemed like a horny bee. The crew consisted of John, the cameraman, and Drew, the soundman. Nigel, the producer, and Cynthia, never Cindy, the chief reporter. All of them were married. After talking to Cynthia for less than an hour, I couldn't believe that anyone could even marry her, despite her rather sexy look. I'd rate her a 9 on a scale of 10, given her obnoxious nature. If she were a man, she'd probably get hit 10 times a day, including by me. However, since I have never and will never hit a woman, I'll have to suck it up and put up with it. After spending some time with Cynthia and the team, despite my poor work history and dire financial situation, I declined the offer. Their plans seemed foolish to me, and despite assurances from the Emporia government, the assignment was risky. However, when they couldn't find anyone else and raised my remuneration to a ridiculously high level, including a 25% cash payment up front, I decided the risk and pain was worth it. The first few days in Emperor went relatively quiet. The government had assigned a few soldiers to provide security at the first 2 sites we visited. After seeing Cynthia in action, my opinion of her changed somewhat, both positively and negatively. On the positive side, she had a knack for getting people to like her and picking good locations for shoots. She was clearly very smart. Having seen her in some provocative outfits, I would rate her looks even higher than a 9, almost a 10. On the other hand, she often took unnecessary risks, didn't listen to sound advice, said things that the authoritarian government of Emporia might take as offensive, was strict with the crew, and tried to be strict with me, though I didn't tolerate her antics. Although Cynthia mockingly told me several times, "You don't look like you're fit to be a bodyguard, Gregg," she seemed to eventually appreciate my work, although she never thanked me. Her disapproving gratitude was due to the fact that I had to neutralize no less than 5 people who tried to harm her or were unwilling to take no for an answer, including 2 opponents in one case. Besides, she had no choice but to rely on me since over 90% of the locals didn't speak English, and no one on the team but me knew a word of Emporian. My fears that Cynthia, with her reckless words and risks, would eventually get us into trouble were confirmed about a week into our stay in Emperor. The night before, I had cautioned Cynthia about the questions she was going to ask a government official. He spoke English, so I couldn't change her questions in translation. The next morning, the bee ignored my warnings. The official was clearly offended, the interview abruptly cut off, and after that, our military escort disappeared. In the afternoon, when it became obvious that the escort wasn't coming back, I insisted that we go to the international airport as soon as possible and get out of Emporia. John and Nigel agreed. Andrew remained silent but looked at me wide-eyed, and Cynthia brushed off my concerns. I would have gone off on my own and left her to her fate if it weren't for the fact that I wouldn't have gotten the remaining 75% of my paycheck. Then, besides, I liked John and Nigel. Andrew, not so much, and I didn't want them to get hurt. That night, I went to a rough part of town and, like Jack Reacher, beat the crap out of a thug who tried to rob me and took away his gun. Unfortunately, the gun was an old East German version of a Makarov and was a piece of S, but it was better than nothing. Plus, the bandit had a spare magazine. The next day went relatively smoothly, but the very next day, we were intercepted by 4 big guys in dark suits with guns at the ready. They spoke only Emporian, so I was the only one who could communicate with them. It quickly became clear that they were some local version of the secret police, concerned about Cynthia's conversation with a government official 2 days ago. After a brief exchange of remarks, they demanded a recording of the interview. Apparently, technology in Emperor was lagging behind the West, as all of our materials had already been digitized and transmitted back to the US via the internet from the hotel. I may have made a mistake in letting them know, but we had no analog recordings, so there was little I could do. Their reaction was furious, and they started saying threatening things. Nothing I said calmed them down. They clearly wanted blood. One of them pushed Cynthia to the ground, and the other 2 grabbed their weapons. I had no choice. I certainly wasn't going to be imprisoned in Emperor. I'd rather die. Since my reaction time was twice as fast as theirs, they were both dead before their pistols were even back in their holsters. However, after 2 shots, my old Makarov pistol jammed. One of the remaining cops pulled out his gun, but I pushed his hand away, and he shot Andrew, killing him on the spot. I punched the guy hard twice in the face, and he fell down, dropping his gun. The 4th guy, who had knocked Cynthia down and threatened her, instead of grabbing his gun, lunged at me. Fortunately, although he weighed at least 70 pounds more than me, he was more of an enforcer than a fighter. I dodged his blow and slammed his head twice against the brick wall next to us while the rest of the team watched in awe, and Cynthia sat unmoving. I picked up the gun the 3rd guy had dropped. It was a modern version of a Makarov. I put a bullet each into the heads of the 3rd and 4th secret policemen, then I took the gun and a spare magazine from the pocket of one of the dead men and hid them in my possession. "We need to get out of here," I shouted. "What about Andrew?" asked Nigel. "He's dead. Lead him, the sound equipment, and the camera, and let's get out of here," I growled. Cynthia protested, but I didn't care. I literally threw her over my shoulder and sprinted away. When we had gone about a kilometer, Nigel and John began to choke and couldn't go any further. I set a distraught Cynthia back on the ground, foiled her feeble attempt to slap me, and laid out my plan. "Look, we'll soon be searched for all over the country. Nigel and John, do you both have wallets and passports?" They both nodded. "While Cynthia stays here, I'll call a cab. You'll get to the international airport in the capital and take the first flight out. Cynthia and I will try to cross the border into the nearest country. It's about 40 kilometers away. We'll contact you as soon as we're safe." "Maybe we should stay together?" asked John. "No, they'll be looking for 3 men and a woman. Splitting up is our only hope, and given how Cynthia is reacting here, she needs my protection." Before they could say anything, a cab pulled up. I told Cynthia to hide. Surprisingly, she obeyed and stopped the cab. I told the driver where to take the passengers, promised him €100 tip if he delivered them within the hour, then I told John and Nigel how the finances were, and they set off. I turned back to Cynthia, who now realized the gravity of the situation. "We need to find a way to change our appearance and then a hotel to lay low for a couple of nights before escaping to a neighboring country," I said. Surprisingly, she didn't argue, just nodded in agreement. First, we went to the drugstore, the word sounds almost the same in Emporium, to buy hair dye, scissors, and fake glasses. We split up so as not to arouse suspicion, and we each bought what we needed. We then separately visited a local department store, bought clothes that looked like local clothes, and changed out of our Western outfits. Finding a cheap hotel, I checked in and surreptitiously gave Cynthia the room number. Once we were in the room, we had a frank conversation. Cynthia finally admitted that she should have heeded my advice not to ask provocative questions of a government official. She was upset about Andrew's death and our situation in general. Since I don't like to kick people when they're already depressed, except for the secret police officers who clearly wished us ill, I sympathized with her. After the conversation, we both dyed our hair, hers and mine, and prepared fake glasses. I was looking out the window, thinking of possible escape routes in case the situation worsened, when I saw 2 old Russian-made Gas-24 cars pull up, and 8 men dressed exactly like the secret police who had detained us got out. They couldn't find us, except I turned to Cynthia. "Did anyone from the government pass anything on to you during our stay?" "Yes, they handed me a ceremonial key to the Capitol on the first day we arrived," she replied. I wasn't around when they handed her the key, or I would have gotten rid of it right away. "Let me see it," I said. Cynthia took it out of her purse. As soon as I took the key in my hands, I realized it had a built-in beacon. "We need to leave now," I said sharply. "What?" she started, but I interrupted her. From the bathroom with all our hair coloring products, I put the ceremonial key in my pocket. "Take your purse, leave the room, and wait for me at the north staircase." Cynthia did as I asked. Taking my purse, I looked around the room to make sure nothing would give us away, and then ran to the north staircase. We were on the 3rd floor. I grabbed Cynthia's hand, and we made our way up to the 4th floor, pressing ourselves against the wall. We heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Apparently, they were blocking the elevator and both flights of stairs. As soon as the door to the 3rd floor closed, we tore for the 1st floor, ran out the emergency exit, and ran like hell until Cynthia couldn't run anymore. As she was panting, resting her hands on her knees, we were almost a kilometer from the hotel. A guy on a motorcycle drove by and parked it as he stood with his back to me and locked it up. I came up behind him and choked him unconscious, laid him gently on his back, and moved him out of the way. I gave Cynthia a helmet and started the motorcycle as she got on behind me. The motorcycle was a year-old Dnieper, not very powerful, but it did the job and got us 20 kilometers from the hotel. After about a kilometer, I put the ceremonial key into an idling truck with German license plates and sped away, hoping that the secret police would follow the truck, which once it started moving, would probably go in a direction perpendicular to ours. We stayed at a new, cheap hotel. We were chagrined when we saw on the fuzzy tube TV in our modest room our photos on the news, along with those of John and Nigel. Fortunately, the photos were taken before we had dyed and cut our hair and used glasses. I have to say that our disguise turned out to be quite successful. The news anchor noted that John and Nigel were separated from us but did not indicate that they had been captured. When Cynthia and I had calmed down a bit, and I had brought takeout food and drinks into the room, we were both able to relax, at least a little. And then, lewd thoughts began to enter my head. Even in her modest clothes, with her new hair color and style, I suddenly began to see her as an attractive woman, not a star. When she said, "I'm going to take a shower," and took off her top, leaving only her bra on before going into the bathroom, my thoughts began to drift off in a different direction. We were in a foreign country where every police officer or government official, if not every citizen, was looking for us. If we were caught, that would be the end of it. I hadn't been with a woman in 3 months, and there was a naked woman standing outside the bathroom door who seemed more vulnerable, despite her complicated nature, and she had a gorgeous body. Normally, her marriage would have been a major obstacle for me, but under the circumstances, it was lost on me. I stripped off all my clothes and stepped into the bathroom. The shower was awkward for the cramped space, but I opened the curtain and stepped inside as the water was already running. The smooth, sculpted, naked body in front of me instantly turned me on. "What are you doing?" asked Cynthia in a bored tone, making no attempt to cover her breasts. "I need a shower too, and I figured, why waste water? This cheap hotel probably has a small supply of hot water," I replied indifferently as my eyes studied her gorgeous body. "Then you can wash my back," she said indifferently, turning her back to me and holding out the soap. I silently washed not only her back but also her ass and the back of her legs. She didn't make the slightest protest. "Gregg, I realize I can't stop you if you decide to sleep with me, given your power and our situation," she said calmly, looking me in the eye, "but I want you to know that I don't consent." "I understand," I replied, shrugging my shoulders. "We'll probably get caught anyway, and I won't let myself be captured and end up in an imperial prison, so we're probably doomed," I replied emotionlessly. She didn't react in any way as I continued to wash her breasts. As expected, the hot water started to run out, so we turned it off and got out of the tub. The towels were old, but we managed to dry each other off enough not to soak the sheets, at least with the water from the shower. With surprising ease, I lifted Cynthia's body, despite her weight, and carried her into the main part of the room, laying her on the bed. I carefully covered her with the blanket. "You're downright a real heavyweight, Gregg," she smiled. "Oh, Cynthia, my dear, I think I can handle this better than a real heavyweight," I replied with a smirk. Cynthia shrieked. I joked, she shrieked again. I joked again, and suddenly, we both felt like we were skewered. I lost consciousness for a short time. Luckily, I didn't fall completely on top of Cynthia, so as not to hurt her. When I came to, I was over her, leaning on my elbows. She was feeble, her eyes slowly opening. We looked at each other. After a long silence, she murmured, "You're a terrible person, Gregg, enjoying this." "You're a great actress, Cynthia," I replied after a pause. "You'll probably win an Oscar for that." "That won't stop you, will it?" she grinned. "Absolutely not," I smiled. The rest of the night was the strangest and most exhausting of my life. When I finally fell asleep with my arms around her, I was more exhausted than I had been after any training day at Ranger School. When we woke up the next morning, I wrapped my arms around her and looked into her eyes, realizing I had never kissed her on the lips before. I ventured in a moment of frozen breath, and I took a step. "You suddenly decided to get romantic," she muttered, but didn't try to shy away. "Maybe I'm starting to see you as more than just stunning good looks," I smiled. "Or are you just faking it to get something?" Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "I might be faking it, but only to get an extra shower," I replied with a smile. After a night together, we felt comfortable with each other. Both of us washed off the traces of the night's adventures in the shower, carefully paying attention to each other. You could say that the last 2 weeks had been a mixed time, similar to what Dickens described. On the one hand, they were the best of times because there didn't seem to be a single day that we didn't spend time together, at least twice, deepening our feelings. Throughout this period, she kept claiming as if I was raping her, but it seemed to turn her on more and more, and I didn't challenge it. Our intimate moments with Cynthia surpassed all my previous experiences, giving them a whole new dimension. On the other hand, they were also the worst times because we lived in constant fear, not knowing when the secret police would catch up with us. However, when we were able to contact Nigel via an internet cafe after about 3 days of running away, we heard good news. He reported that he and John were safe at home, and that the US and UK governments had promised not to extradite them to avoid capture. I had to resort to stealing money from a few passers-by, but I memorized their names and addresses, promising myself to pay them all back double if I managed to escape. And in the end, I kept my promise. Incredibly, in the end, after about 20 days of fleeing, Cynthia and I did make it back to the West, albeit through a different country than we had originally planned. While the imperial government made no attempt to extradite Cynthia, Nigel, or John, they did try to extradite me. However, after testimony from the other 3 men, the State Department denied the request, given the lack of a formal extradition treaty. Upon arrival in the United States, Cynthia and I parted with a farewell night of passion. She gathered her impressions of our stay in Emporia, as well as her previous work and a few subsequent events, to begin making a documentary. She, Nigel, and others immediately set to work on the project upon our return. I was paid in full for my services and went on a week's vacation to Aruba. Upon my return, I received some good news. My attorney, a real fight dog, had fought to have my disparagement overturned. He discovered that one of the witnesses had perjured himself. While I probably should have been disparaged anyway, it made a huge difference to my fellow attorneys in the state and the Virginia Supreme Court. After approximately 90 days, I was reinstated, but on probation. The law firm where my attorney worked proved to be the perfect place for my skills, and I joined them as an associate immediately after reinstatement. A documentary made by Cynthia aired a few months after my return and my reinstatement at the new firm. I thought she did a great job. However, when I saw her interview on TV, I was surprised to learn that she was pregnant. I didn't know what that meant, but I sent her a congratulatory email from my new work email address anyway. It had been almost 7 months since my return from Emporia when I had just gotten back to the apartment on a Saturday morning after a few hours of working out. I had just finished showering and was looking for something to eat, hoping I wouldn't have to go out for lunch, when someone knocked on the door. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see Cynthia there, who was very pregnant. I had never had to deal with pregnant women before. She looked amazing. Her hair was back to its natural color and style, and it was like she was glowing, although there was no smile on her face. "Cynthia, it's great to see you." "You look great," I stated frankly. She started the conversation with a threat. "We need to talk, Gregg." I invited her in, offered her a drink, and we sat down at the kitchen table. I let her start the conversation. "So, Gregg," she began in a threatening tone, "somehow your little swimmers have overcome my pregnancy protection." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "So, it turns out I'm the father of your baby." "Yes," she continued, "my husband and I stopped having sex a week before we left for Emporium, including round-trip travel time. We were out of the US for a little over a month, and when we got back, I was already pregnant, so you can figure it out for yourself. But before I leave, I'm going to take a DNA sample from you, just to be sure," she said, pulling a cotton swab out of her purse like in the TV crime shows and placing it on the table. I swallowed my saliva and asked quietly, "How did your husband react to that?" "He divorced me. He didn't believe my rape accusations, especially since I refused to file a police report against you. In the end, it was for the best. We were having marital problems even before my trip to Emporium." "You haven't thought about terminating the pregnancy?" I asked. "No, for 2 reasons," she replied. "First, while I support the right to choose, I personally just can't bear the thought of abortion. Second, because quite frankly, I really enjoyed being with you, even though we're both not without flaws. Maybe we have a chance at a relationship considering we're going to have a child together." I was stunned and sat there with a tired look in my eyes for what seemed like a very long time. Cynthia was silent, just looking at me. Suddenly, it was as if lightning had struck me in the head. My whole nervous system was pierced. I got up from the chair, took Cynthia's hand, helped her up from the chair, lifted her into my arms, and carried her to the bed. It struck me that her 7-month pregnant body excited me as much as her slender pre-pregnancy body did. Cynthia stayed with me for the rest of the weekend. Monday morning, as I was getting ready for work and she was temporarily back in New York, we had our first serious conversation. Most of the time, we just enjoyed each other without discussing serious topics. "Maybe I fall in love with you, Cynthia," I said out loud. "Maybe I fall in love with you, Gregg," she replied. "You could move to Virginia." I still need to work here for at least a year to complete my probationary period, I suggested. I can work from anywhere, and I wouldn't mind moving to Northern Virginia. It has everything I like about New York, but it's easier to live there, she replied. Maybe you could move in with me. We can go to yoga class together, I said. Yes, but I need more space. I have a lot of stuff. A 2-bedroom apartment in my complex will be vacant next week. I can move in there without breaking my lease. Sounds great. Plan on moving in with me next weekend. I'll organize a yoga class, and you find a truck to haul your stuff, I said. We kissed passionately goodbye, and I lovingly stroked her belly before driving her to the airport, where she disappeared after another passionate kiss. On the way to work, I felt better than ever. After that weekend, I was optimistic about the future, much brighter than ever before. In the evening, I didn't go to work out but instead planned to shop for baby furniture. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and if you're curious to see where this journey takes us next, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single update. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and kicking, and every like, comment, and share means the world to us. We've got plenty more stories, insights, and surprises coming your way, so stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.